Okay, we'll just wait for YouTube to catch up so that doesn't cut off. Welcome back, history seekers, to another episode of Fistory. Tonight, the third episode on the plague, and I'd like to take you down a bit of an autism thing, and of course, I you know had the bloody YouTube on the background, right? So I was looking at another one of the sort of like things from Catherine Horrocks, which we will return to in the next episode because there's more. There's so much more. There's like all the stuff in England and no. But I thought it would be interesting to just do like a little bit of a diversion into how it is that we know about the plague, right? The modern sort of like version of it. Now, excuse me, for those pardon me, for those of you who know anything about this kind of like stuff, right, you will have been reliably informed that the Black Death was the bubonic plague, sort of always, and in all cases. And I sort of started wondering to myself, how is it that we actually know this? And I discovered that the reason that we know this is that there was a massive outbreak of plague in China and India in the late 1800s. And it was from this outbreak that a guy called Alexander Yersin identified the plague bacillus. That's why it's called Yersinia pestis. And that's sort of how we get sort of the modern conception that all plagues in the past, including the plague of Justinian, which is very, 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 very old. I should probably do something on that actually as well. And the Black Death are all bubonic plague, even though so I thought I'd do a bit of research into that, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. This is an amazing picture. This is cat catching a mouse, early 20th century, from Sichuan, courtesy of Harvard Art Museum. I believe this is basically sort of like during the sort of the plague era, plague in China's dynastic twilight. There's like some cool art, but this one was like by far the most striking. The question that I sort of had, which I didn't actually get around to like asking Grok about, but maybe I'll do a bit of research, is how did this event lead to the rise of, or sort of contribute to the rise of communism in China as sort of like one of the sort of last events shaking the foundations of the Qing dynasty. My Chinese is bloody terrible. Anyway, what started me off on this autism trail was this. This is from Catherine Horrocks. The Plague in Avignon. The following letter, sent from the papal court at Avignon, was copied into the chronicle of an unknown Flemish cleric as part of his account of the plague. It is not entirely clear where the paraphrase ends and direct quotation begins. So Breve Chronicon Clerici Annomini. So the chronicles of anonymous clerics, basically. Recueil des Chroniques de Flanders 3. So the chronicles of Flanders. This is from 1856, but presumably the account is earlier. A huge mortality and pestilence started in September 1347, as I have seen in a copy of a letter written by a canon and cantor of Saint Donation, who was at the time in the company of a cardinal, his master at the Roman Curia, and sent the letter to his colleagues in Bruges to give them the news by way of a warning. It recounts how terrible events and unheard of calamities had affected the whole of a province in eastern India for 3 days. On the first day, it rained frogs, snakes, lizards, scorpions, and many other similar poisonous animals. One of the things I love about accounts from this time is like all just the weird portents. On the second day, thunder was heard, and thunderbolts and lightning flashes mixed with hailstones of incredible size fell to earth, killing almost all of the people, from the greatest to the least. On the third day, fire, accompanied by stinking smoke, possibly just Indian cooking fires, descended from heaven and consumed all the remaining men and animals and burnt all the cities and settlements in the region. The entire province was infected by these calamities, and it is surmised that the whole coast and all of the neighboring countries caught the infection from it, by means of the stinking breath of the wind which blew southwards from the region affected by plague. and always, day by day, more people died. Now, by God's will, it has reached our coasts, and as some people believe, in this way. On the 31st of December 1347, 3 galleys loaded with spices and other goods put into the port of Genoa after being storm-driven from the east. They were horribly infected, and when the Genoese realized this and that other men were dying suddenly without remedy, the ships were driven from the port with burning arrows and other engines of war. For there was no one who had dared to touch them or do business with them who did not immediately die. And thus, driven from port to port, one of the galleys at last put in at Marseille, and at its arrival the same thing happened. Men were infected without realizing it and died suddenly, and the inhabitants thereupon drove the galley away. It joined up with the other 2 ships, which were wandering about the sea, and it is said that they were heading towards the Atlantic along the Spanish coast, and that they will therefore, if they can, put in at the ports further south to conclude their trading. Excuse me. The infection that these galleys left behind along their whole route, particularly in coastal cities and regions, first in Greece, then in Sicily and Italy, especially in Tuscany, and subsequently in Marseille, and then as a result throughout Languedoc, was so great that its duration and horror can scarcely be believed, let alone described. It is said that the disease takes 3 forms. In the first, people suffer an infection of the lungs, which leads to breathing difficulties. Whoever has this corruption or contamination to any extent cannot escape, but will die within 2 days. Anatomical examinations in which many corpses were opened were carried out in many Italian cities, and also on the Pope's orders in Avignon, to discover the origins of this disease. And it was found that all those who died suddenly had infected lungs and had been coughing up blood. And this form is the most dangerous of all these terrible things, which is to say that it is the most contagious. For when one infected person dies, everyone who saw him during that illness, visited him, had any dealings with him, or carried him to burial, immediately follows him without any remedy. Now, this seems to be describing the pneumonic plague. Now, plague has 3 forms, essentially. There is the pneumonic, where it gets into the lungs. This is the most deadly version. And of course, the thing about pneumonic plague is that it can actually be spread by droplets. So this does sort of give some evidence to the idea that perhaps there were ways of spreading the plague that did not require fleas as a vector. Most of the time, of course, when you talk about the plague, people imagine it as being purely a disease of rats and fleas. The fleas feed on the rats who have the plague, then the fleas get the plague and they bite like a human, and no, they spread the plague this way. But there is also pneumonic plague, the most severe and highly contagious form, a bacterial infection that primarily affects the lungs. It can occur as a primary infection through inhalation of respiratory droplets from an infected person or animal, or as a secondary complication when the bacteria spread from untreated bubonic or septicemic plague to the lungs. So bubonic plague, of course, is the version with the meaty buboes, basically infecting the lymphatic system, which then goes on, and septicemic, where it gets into the bloodstream. The pneumonic form of plague is distinguished by its potential for rapid person-to-person transmission via airborne droplets, making it a significant public health threat if not promptly identified and contained. So this is a possible mechanism. There are still sort of questions as to how the Black Death spread so quickly across Europe. Hang on, I think the cat wants to go out. Oh, excuse me. Cat, come on, get out. Get out. Silly. See, all the talk about plague has scared the cat, and it needs to leave. Right, sorry about that. Since I just broke my dialogue, you can donate to the channel via Entropy if you wish. Please do. It's it's a very, very nice thing to receive. Linkies are in the chats, in the description. Description. What is with my brain today? I even misspelled Manchuria on the thumbnail. Thank you very much, Jack B. Nimble, for pointing that out. Manchuria. Oh, yes, Manchuria. Have you ever been to Manchuria? Yes. So The issue that people have with the idea that it was solely bubonic plague that was part of the Black Death was the speed with which it moved across the continent. And some people have said that there is no way that it could have spread as quickly as it did. Although one would suspect that if it was pneumonic plague, then maybe if people like fleeing and you had like sort of chain infection, I don't know, right? I'm just, Um, so transmission of pneumonic plague occurs through close contact with infected individuals who cough out bacteria-laden droplets, or less commonly through exposure to infected animals like rodents or cats that develop pneumonia. Symptoms typically emerge suddenly after an incubation period of 1 to 3 days, including high fever, chills, headaches, weakness, rapid progression to pneumonia, shortness of breath, chest pain, and a cough that may produce bloody or watery sputum. Unlike bubonic plague, which is flea-borne and causes swollen lymph nodes, or septicemic plague, which leads to bloodstream infection and tissue damage, pneumonic plague directly targets the respiratory system and can be fatal within 18 to 24 hours without treatment. So the people who believe that bubonic plague is responsible for the Black Death, this is what they believe the people in the 1300s were describing, right? They hang out with like other people, they get the droplets, and then a day later they get sick, and then boom, they're dead within 24 hours. That is insane. Although the tales of people sort of dropping dead immediately, and this of course is why the moderns would be like, oh, clearly that's not true. I have seen it. I don't know. I'm just now, one thing to sort of realize, okay, is that treatment for diseases like the plague are not even 100 years old. Okay, so streptomycin, which is the sort of the antibiotic that you use to treat plague, was discovered in 1943. Not even 100 years old. Okay, there were sulfur drugs invented earlier, but I think that was like 1920. So even the sort of the treatments that partially worked are only like 100 years old. So future historians may look back upon this sort of period of antibiotics as a big sort of aberration in sort of treatment, and possibly one of the reasons why sort of degeneracy like spread sort of so widely across the Western world, because rather than having to have these sort of strict codes of behavior that stopped disease outbreaks and stopped you from like getting sort of like weird infections and stuff like that, medical science has enabled sort of degeneracy without the sort of medical consequences. The the homosexual community, of course, is well known for these kinds of like infections. So this was discovered by Alexandre Yersin, a Swiss-French physician and bacteriologist. And essentially, the way that he discovered it was that he was in Hong Kong, essentially. Now, after the outbreak of the plague in Hong Kong, in China, what was known as the third plague pandemic, it spread basically to Hong Kong, which of course was owned by the English then, and then from Hong Kong, it spread to like all kinds of other places. The third plague pandemic was a major plague pandemic that began in Yunnan, China. Yunnan, oh, that looks nice. In 1855. Its name refers to its status as the third of at least 3 known major pandemics caused by Yersinia pestis. So in this counting, the first one is the plague of Justinian. Again, that's really, 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 really old. I believe that's what destroyed Athens, essentially. Right? If you're wondering, like, what happened to the Athenians? Well, they all got plague and died. And the second pandemic is the one that we are sort of covering mainly on this series, the 1340s one, commonly known as the Black Death. And this is the third plague pandemic. This episode of plague spread to all inhabited continents and ultimately led to at least 15 million deaths worldwide, including 10 to 12 million in British Raj, India, and 2.2 million in China. So really, it actually hit the Indians the hardest. And I guess given the sort of general level of hygiene in India, one could understand why. It is estimated to have killed fewer people than the second plague pandemic, the Black Death, and possibly the first. The third had one of the highest death tolls among pandemics in human history. And again, this is the kind of stuff, when people, they study microbiology and they get into like pandemic management, all the people who are sort of like giving support to all the stuff with COVID, this is the kind of stuff that like lives in their nightmares, right? This is, to them, this is what they're trying to like prevent. And probably from their point of view, like, whatever measures they have to take are justified, right? It's like the constant threat of nuclear war. According to the WHO, the pandemic was considered active until 1960, when worldwide casualties dropped below 200 a year. So it literally went on for like 100 years, sort of at a slow burn. And doubtless the discovery of streptomycin to treat it was a big reason why this like stopped. The plague, which spread from Yunnan along China's southeast coast and across the world, manifested almost exclusively as bubonic plague, with documentation of incidental pneumonic and septicemic forms. It was carried around the world through ocean-going trade and through transporting infected persons, rats, and cargoes harboring fleas. So this is quite interesting. It was mainly the bubonic form, not the pneumonic form. Now, I don't know whether this means that the strain that was around during the Black Death was more prone to be spread through droplets, right? It would sort of seem that way. Like, based on what we've read, it seems like there was a much higher rate of pneumonic plague going around. Allegedly, I don't know whether 100% whether this is true, but allegedly it seems that you can only really get bubonic plague through flea bites, because the fleas sort of like bite and it drains into the lymphatic system, it goes to the lymph nodes, and then that's how you get bubonic plague. Historians of the late Qing, how do you pronounce that? Qing dynasty? Sounds a bit racist. Plague epidemics generally include the Manchurian plague epidemic of 1910 to 11, which killed 45,000 to 60,000 people. The pneumonic Manchurian. See, here we go. Right. So there was a pneumonic plague outbreak. So this is quite interesting. There are like, it seems like depending on the time and place, you get different forms of the plague breaking out. I wonder why that is. The pneumonic Manchurian plague epidemic was geographically, ecologically, genetically, and epidemiologically distinct from the bubonic plague, which spread globally from southern China. So even Wikipedia basically says this. So I don't know whether they're talking like sort of different mutations of the same virus. I don't know what the mutation rate of Yersinia pestis is, but you would get different, substrains. What do they call them in COVID? Variants. That's right. The Manchurian variant, the South China, the Chingchong variant, right? Oh, we got entropy. Oh, that's nice. Mikey Bikey for $3. Thank you, mate. I know you're not a fan of the right side of history, peeps, but what about those who are on the right side of history? I'll allow it. I'll allow it, Mikey Bikey. Thank you very much. The right side of history, of course, all those people who super chat to the channel, right? So look, if you want to be morally superior, all right, you're in an argument with a leftist and they say, you're not on the right side of history. You'd be like, yeah, I am on the right side of history, though. I donated to the channel. So, what are you going to say? Thanks very much, Mikey. So it spread through the region of Manchuria, reaching Vladivostok and Beijing, which was connected to Manchuria by the Imperial Chinese Railway, but not far beyond due to port and railway closures, as well as preventative medical protocols. It would seem that a lot of sort of the modern sort of medical stuff like quarantines and changes in hospital practices, sort of the first flush of this was because of this pandemic, and then I believe sort of the second phase was during World War One, where they had like, I think it was like typhoid outbreaks and stuff. Typhoid, of course, was a big thing in World War Two as well. So the origin of this was, well, according to Wikipedia, is endemic in populations of infected ground rodents in Central Asia and was a known cause of death among the migrant and established human populations in that region for centuries. An influx of new people because of political conflicts and global trade led to the spread of the disease throughout the world from Asia to the rest of Europe to reach Africa and the Americas. Did Wikipedia just say mass immigration can bring about catastrophic consequences? Surely not. Somebody cancel Wikipedia now. Look down the author. Look up the author of this article and cancel it. I can't believe everybody knows diversity is our strength and we need more and more of it. A natural reservoir, or nidus. Nidus? No, is that what you call a natural reservoir? I wasn't aware of that. For plague is in Western Yunnan. It is still a health risk. The third pandemic of the plague originated in the area after a rapid influx of Han Chinese to exploit the demand for minerals, primarily copper, in the second half of the 19th century. By 1850, the population had exploded to over 7 million people. Increasing transportation throughout the region brought people in contact with plague-inflicted fleas, the primary vector between the yellow-breasted or buff-breasted rat, Rattus flavipectus. Who's a little Rattus flavipectus? Oh my God, that's feeling so good, bros. Also known as Rattus tanezumi, and humans. People brought the fleas and rats back into growing urban areas where small outbreaks sometimes reached epidemic proportions. The plague spread further and began to appear in the Pearl River Delta, including Canton and Hong Kong. Although William McNeill and others believe the plague to have been brought from the interior to the coastal regions by troops returning from battles against the Muslim rebels, Benedict suggested evidence to favor the growing and lucrative opium trade, which began after about 1840. Interesting. In the city of Canton, beginning in March 1894, the disease killed 80,000 people within a few weeks. Bruh. Daily water traffic with the nearby city of Hong Kong rapidly spread the plague. I mean, rats do love like water courses. That is absolutely true. Within 2 months, after 100,000 deaths, the death rates dropped below epidemic rates, but the disease continued to be endemic in Hong Kong until 1929. So again, this seems like a very different pattern to like what we were seeing in the 1380s, in like the 1300s, okay, in Europe, where from contemporary accounts, they are talking losses of, 80, 90% of the population. This seems to be a much more slow burning virus. There has been suggestion or speculation that after the Black Death, which also affected China and stuff like that, we just don't have as many records of that. Everybody who survived basically inherited some kind of genetic resistance to the disease, and it just sort of like burnt itself out like a huge sort of fulminating explosion. The network of global shipping ensured the widespread distribution of the disease over the next few decades. So massive movements of people can cause diseases. I'll note that down for the next time someone says like unlimited diversity is obviously our strength, bros. So it started in Yunnan, Qing China, Qing, the Qing Chong dynasty, right? 1860 to 1870. Then moved to Beihai, Guangzhou, British Hong Kong by 1894. Japanese Taiwan, Empire of Japan, 1896. Then moved to India by 1896 to 1898. Madagascar, Kobe, Mecca and Medina in the Ottoman Empire by 1899. Egypt, Manchuria, Paraguay, Portugal, South Africa, Hawaii. My God. It even got to Glasgow. San Francisco. I've got some stuff about San Francisco, actually. Manila. It even hit Australia. Oh, my God. The Russian Empire, Soviet Union. Back to Fujian, China, Thailand, British Burma, French Tunisia, Trinidad, Venezuela, Peru, and Ecuador by 1908, Bolivia and Brazil. Suffolk in the United Kingdom by 1910. It is disputed. Oh, interesting. Okay. And then the Manchurian plague again in 1911. Apparently this was this is interesting. So apparently the Manchurian plague was the first development of PPE, which is interesting. Like you can see the masks. Oh man, that's a gruesome photo. I hope YouTube doesn't strike me for this. This is history. I don't know what to tell you. So no, these are not Chinese KKK members. These are in fact plague workers in personal protective equipment. Of course, the Spanish flu was in 1918, only about 7 years later. So this was the sort of the birth of masking up. Interesting. Okay, so right, so where was I going with this? So I've got this, which is a report of the International Plague Conference held at Mukden. I believe this is describing the plague in Hong Kong. The epidemic of pneumonic plague, which raged in Manchuria and North China during the winter months of 1910 to 11, caused the death of nearly 50,000 people. Right, so this is 1910. This is a bit later. No outbreak of this magnitude and nature has occurred in modern times, and hitherto, as our knowledge concerning epidemic pneumonic plague has been meager, the study of the Manchurian epidemic in all of its features was one of particular importance. I can't highlight the bit I'm reading, by the way. This is one of those like weird PDFs where it's just like an image. When the outbreak assumed alarming proportions, the Chinese government, actuated by the highest motives of humanity, invited the 11 foreign powers represented at Peking to send specialists to attend an international plague conference for the purposes of throwing further light upon the nature of the disease and to give advice regarding methods for its prevention. This conference was held in Mukden, one of the larger cities which suffered severely from the disease, where the delegates were officially received by His Excellency Xi Liang, Viceroy, and the Honorable Cao Ke Alfred Tsi, Imperial Commissioner. The proceedings of this conference and the information gained therefrom, together with the results of certain supplementary bacteriological investigations, constitute the present report. So what you see here is sort of the start of modern microbiology, essentially, right? Starting with Alexandra Yersin, which we can go back to here. The guy whom it is named after. So basically, Yersin was a ship's doctor on the Saigon Haiphong line, and he was sent at the request of the French government on a mission to Hong Kong in 1894, where an outbreak of plague had already caused 100,000 deaths. Just 15 days later, he isolated the plague bacillus Yersinia pestis. In 1895, he returned to the Institut de Pasteur in Paris with Émile Roux, Albert Camus, and some other people, and prepared the first anti-plague serum, which apparently was not really successful. So the way they usually make these serums, they're called convalescent serum, is they take someone who's recovered from the disease naturally, they take a bunch of blood, they spin the blood, they take out all the red part, the red blood cells, and you're left with this sort of clear, sort of yellowy plasma that contains all the immunological like stuff, basically. And then they give you that. So he went back to Indochina. He installed a small laboratory. He tried the serum in Canton and Amoy and in Bombay with disappointing results. They were also working on a vaccine, but what happened basically was the invention of sulfur drugs. So hang on, I'll get this thing. So yes, so building directly on the discovery of the plague bacterium, Yersin began experimenting with immunization in 1895, testing heat-killed strains of the bacterium on animals to induce immunity. He also developed an anti-plague serum that same year, which was used in early human trials. This foundational research paved the way for broader vaccine development. In 1897, Waldemar Hufkin created the first widely used plague vaccine and inactivated killed bacterial formulation during an outbreak in Bombay, India. He tested it on himself and deployed it on a massive scale, vaccinating millions in India and reducing plague mortality by 50 to 85% in affected areas. His vaccine became a standard tool during the third plague pandemic and was used globally until the mid 20th century. So it seems there was a vaccine. Interesting. I wonder why they stopped using it. Probably because of the invention of streptomycin. Would be my guess. It stopped becoming something that they couldn't treat. Subsequent advancements included live attenuated vaccines, such as the EV76 strain developed in the early 20th century and used in the Soviet Union from the 1930s onward. Oof. So apparently there was a bunch of like biowarfare stuff done on pneumonic plague as well. I tried asking Grok about this, but for some reason it doesn't want to like tell you anything about bioweapons research, which is a shame because honestly, bioweapons research has a really, really fascinating history. Maybe I could go through that sometime. I've always been like really fascinated by the development of biological weapons for some weird reason. A killed wholesale vaccine was so they did have vaccines. The discovery of sulfur drugs in the 1930s. I thought it was the 1920s. Didn't they just tell me? Sorry. Fact checked. BTFO'd. The first antibiotics capable of treating bubonic plague were sulfonamides, discovered in 1932 with the development of Prontosil by Gerhard Domagg and his team. These were found to be effective against bubonic plague by the late 1930s, although with limitations, it was less effective for pneumonic or septicemic forms. So it didn't work very, very well for pneumonic plague. Streptomycin, discovered in 1943, later became a more effective option. So there you go. I've got something else here as well. Here we go. An unexplained calamity. So this is from a paper, Casa de Macau, Australia Bulletin. Without exaggeration, I may assert that so far as trade and commerce are concerned, the plague has assumed the importance of an unexampled calamity. So stated the dispatch of the governor of Hong Kong, Sir William Robinson, to the Secretary of State for Colonies in London, 20th of June, 1894. Yes, we used to be a proper country that actually had colonies, believe it or not. But that's okay because now we've got Islam and mumble rap. Fantastic improvement. He meant that there was no other example of so great a calamity. The calamity was a serious outbreak of bubonic plague which brought Hong Kong to its knees. Strangely, although it also devastated Canton, it left Macau largely intact. Sir William might have added that it was a vast human tragedy as well, for several thousand people, mostly poor Chinese, died, and more than 100,000 fled in panic to their home villages. Oh man, so that's what that looked like. Wait, how do I get back from this? Oh, for God's sake. Oh, I didn't show you guys a picture. Right, it opened a new tab. Yes, so that's what it looked like. In Taiping-shan. I presume that's somewhere in Hong Kong. It appears that just before the disease reached Hong Kong, it had broken out in Canton in January that year, and by June it had accounted for some 800,000 deaths. Rapidly moving downriver, it first appeared in the Taiping-shan district in the early months of 1894. At that time, Taiping-shan, high above Kennedy Town to the west of Hong Kong's central district, was a crowded, squalid settlement of Chinese workers. There was no water supply or sanitation, and living conditions were utterly filthy. In Taiping-shan, there was panic and hysteria, for the outcome in the great majority of cases was an agonizing death, after 3 days of suffering. A graphic description of the symptoms of bubonic plague was given by M. Wilm in his Report of Plague in Hong Kong, compiled in 1896. Wilm observed that, quote, at the outset of the disease, the tongue usually became swollen, bright red at the tip and edges, and was covered with a grayish-white fur. That sounds like me after I've been drinking. Usually on the second or third day of the disease, this fur became brownish or black and dried in a crust. Ew. The tongue becomes cracked and fissured. The lips soon become dry and also often fissured. The mucous membranes of the mouth and the pharynx was usually bright red. The appetite disappeared. There was frequently uncontrollable vomiting and great thirst. I don't know whether I guess he's talking about the bubo. He goes on, but the details are too distressing to relate here. Okay. On the 10th of May, 1894, Hong Kong was declared an infected port, and within the space of a few weeks, the administration was faced with an epidemic of great magnitude. By July, there had been 2,442 deaths. Hospitals were quickly established on board the naval ship Hygeia, at Kennedy Town Police Station, and at Kennedy Town Gas Works. The first two were run by European staff, whilst the third was manned by Chinese personnel of the Tung Hua Hospital. The governor told his superior in London that, quote, it was deemed advisable to give the Chinese doctors a free hand at first. In any case, it is difficult to persuade the Chinese to report cases of sickness, and their foolish and violent prejudice against Western medical men is quite sufficient to induce them, as they certainly did for the first fortnight or 3 weeks of the existence of the plague, not only to secrete their sick, but often to desert their plague-stricken friends and relations after death. Oh my God. So this is another picture. Oh man, colonial England. Dude, crazy. Soldiers of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry supervised the removal of a coffin of a plague victim carried on a pole by coolies. I'm pretty sure coolie is a banned word now. And far better for it, right? On the 10th of May, 1894, Hong Kong was declared an infected port. Oh no, hang on, I read that. Sorry, pardon me. The government's means of dealing with the crisis was severe. No one then knew how plague was transmitted. The only certain thing was that it spread rapidly. Insanitary conditions were thought to be the cause, so 7,000 people were evicted from their homes, 350 houses were condemned and sealed off, and several boatloads of patients were sent to Canton. The army was sent in to cleanse and disinfect the fetid slums and collect the dead. Woof. The 1st Battalion of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry was stationed in Hong Kong at the time, and when the plague broke out, volunteers were called for to work on plague relief. About 600 of the 1,000 men did so. Dude. The unit history tells us that, quote, the work was unpleasant in the extreme, searching narrow back streets and overcrowded houses for plague victims, tending the sick in makeshift isolation hospitals, and disinfecting the houses and streets with chloride of lime and whitewash. One of the most unpleasant tasks faced by the volunteers was the location and removal of the dead, searching dark houses and carrying away the bodies to be buried in mass graves. The volunteers of the KSLI lived in quarantine in separate tented camps and were given extra rum rations to help them cope with the work. Yeah, I think you'd need a bit of extra rum. Remarkably, only one officer and 9 men of the regiment fell ill, and only 2 actually died of the plague. Now that is fascinating. You would think that that the British Army soldiers would have also got it. I wonder if that's like differences in hygiene. But if it was down to like fleas, maybe they had like, they like washed with lime or something that kept the fleas off. But you would think that you'd only need like a couple of flea bites in order to transmit. I'm not sure exactly how many flea bites you need to transmit bubonic plague. That is quite fascinating. Maybe they just got the coolies to do most of the like actual body dragging and stuff. I don't know. These soldiers found unimaginable horrors. They were on one occasion accompanied by a 28-year-old Scottish doctor, James Lewison, acting superintendent of the civil hospital. He wrote, quote, On a miserable sodden matting soaked with abominations, there were 4 forms stretched out. One was dead, the tongue black and protruding. The next had the muscular twitchings and semi-comatose condition heralding dissolution. Another sufferer, a female child about 10 years old, lay in accumulated filth of apparently 2 or 3 days. The fourth was wildly delirious. Bloody hell. So this is the kind of like hospital that they set up, a big improvement of the slums of Taiping Shan. I'm presuming that opium was probably also like a big thing in these slums. I don't know. It sounds bloody awful. Excuse me. When the disinfection of houses was undertaken, it was the usual practice for the occupants to be issued with new clothes. Their own clothes, beddings, curtains, and carpets were sent to a steam disinfecting station. That would have killed the fleas. The premises were then thoroughly cleaned by spraying the walls with a solution of perchlorate of mercury. Alternatively, rooms were fumigated with free chlorine obtained by the addition of diluted sulfuric acid to chlorinated lime. Finally, the floors and furniture were scrubbed with Jay's fluid, a well-known disinfectant, and the walls were lime-washed. During these operations, the occupants were given temporary accommodation on Chinese marriage boats anchored in the harbour off Stonecutters Island. Other measures taken including the burial of the dead in a plague cemetery at Kennedy Town and the regular disinfecting of all public latrines with chlorinated lime. The soldiers who carried out these draconian measures were resisted fiercely, and the papers spoke of plague riots. Violent mobs prevented the removal of patients with plague from the Tonghua Hospital to a special plague hospital. Doctors had to carry pistols, and a gunboat was needed to restore order. Dude. Placards were posted in Hong Kong and Canton accusing the English doctors of cutting open pregnant women and scooping out the eyes of children in order to make medicines for the treatment of plague victims. Race relations in Hong Kong plunged to a new low. This was a crisis of public health, public order, and soon an economic crisis as well, as ships stopped entering a port that relied on trade for its existence. Dude. Crazy. Okay, what else have I got here? So this actually spread as far as San Francisco, but again, not sort of to the same degree that you saw with the Black Death. And again, I'm sort of like wondering why. Is it better sanitation? Is it the discovery of things like lime wash, chlorine solution and stuff like that? Or was it sort of a different strain of the virus? The San Francisco plague of 1900 to 1904 was an epidemic of bubonic plague centered on San Francisco's Chinatown. It was the first plague epidemic in the continental United States. Excuse me. The epidemic was recognized by medical authorities in March 1900, but its existence was denied for more than 2 years by California's Republican governor, Henry Gage. His denial was based on business reasons to protect the reputations of San Francisco and California and to prevent the loss of revenue due to quarantine. Interesting. The failure to act quickly may have allowed the disease to establish itself among local animal populations. Federal authorities worked to prove that there was a major health problem, and they isolated the affected area. This undermined Gage's credibility, and he lost the governorship in the 1902 elections. The new governor, George Pardee, implemented public health measures, and the epidemic was stopped in 1904. There were 121 cases identified, resulting in 119 deaths. So not that many cases, but almost 100% mortality. Of 121 cases, 119 died. There are only 2 survivors. Bro. Much of urban San Francisco was destroyed by a fire in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, including all of the Chinatown district. The process of rebuilding began immediately, but it took several years. While reconstruction was in full swing, a second plague epidemic hit San Francisco in May and August of 1907, but it was not centered in Chinatown. Cases occurred randomly throughout the city, including cases identified across the bay in Oakland. San Francisco's politicians and press reacted very differently this time, wanting the problem to be solved speedily. Health authorities worked quickly to assess and eradicate the disease. Approximately $2 million was spent between 1907 and 1911 to kill as many rats as possible in the city in order to control one of the disease's vectors. Right. So they went straight after the rats. Interesting. Right. Well, okay. So that would work. Okay. And then there was an outbreak in Los Angeles. So this is still I know this is about the Manchurian outbreak in 1811 or whatever the date is on the thumbnail, the misspelt thumbnail. Thank you very much. But this went on for like 100 years. Essentially, the outbreak of this plague spread all around the world, and it continued flaring up. Essentially, in 1924, there was a plague outbreak in Los Angeles. It was a localized epidemic of pneumonic plague this time that infected 32 individuals in Los Angeles, California, resulting in 31 fatalities. So again, 100%, nearly 99% fatality rate between late October and early December, primarily affecting Mexican laborers and residents in overcrowded neighborhoods near downtown, including areas associated with Union Station construction. The outbreak stemmed from bubonic plague transmission via infected rat fleas, escalating to human airborne spread characteristic of the pneumonic variant. So I don't know whether it says that they all died of pneumonic plague or whether it started as bubonic. Can you breathe in rat gas? All right? Are there people like whispering to squirrels and being like, who's a good little like squirrel? And you're like, it breathes on me. Linked to an epizootic among domestic rats and ground squirrels in urban and peri-urban settings, the event underscored persistent rodent reservoirs in 20th century American cities, despite prior eradication efforts. So that, the next time you meet some like punk person and they're like, rats are lovely, be like, yeah, but are they really? The Public Health Service emphasized rapid case isolation, mandatory quarantine of affected districts, widespread fumigation, and intensified rat proofing and poisoning campaigns, which halted secondary transmission without broader metropolitan spread. So whatever was going around by this time, this does seem to have been Yersinia pestis, right? And, rat-borne, flea-borne, all this kind of other stuff. Otherwise, presumably, these measures would not have worked. This outbreak marked the concluding major urban human plague epidemic in the United States, demonstrating the efficacy of targeted vector control amid high case fatality rates exceeding 95% for untreated pneumonic cases. And again, they didn't actually develop like drugs that could treat this for like 10 years afterwards. Let's see what else we got. So yes, let's see. I think that's it. I've got plague in historical context. Oh, here we go. A little bit more background on the Los Angeles plague. Fueled by domestic migration and influx of Mexican immigrants fleeing the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920. The growth in migration strained housing resources, particularly in low-income districts near downtown, such as the area around present-day Union Station, where Mexican laborers and families congregated in overcrowded boarding houses and tenements, lacking adequate sanitation infrastructure like piped water and sewers. These conditions fostered environments conducive to rodent proliferation, as garbage accumulation and substandard waste disposal provided food sources for commensal rats. So, New York now, basically. Pre-existing plague circulation in California's sylvatic rodent cycles, established since the early 1900s following introductions via shipborne rats from Asia during the 1900 San Francisco outbreak, amplified risks in urbanizing areas. Don't know what's up with my speaking voice today. By 1924, epizootics, sudden die-offs among ground squirrels and domestic rats, had just displaced infected fleas, increasing human exposure potential through bites or environmental contact, especially near construction sites and rail yards adjacent to human settlements. Poor sanitation in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods, characterized by slum-like dwellings and uncollected refuse, bridged plague reservoirs to urban rat populations, highlighting vulnerability despite prior awareness of rodent control needs from earlier typhus and sanitation campaigns. So there you go. It all comes back to the rats, at least in modern times. But that plague also gave birth to sort of, the start of microbiology, the start of vaccines, however much that technology may be discredited in modern times, and I guess the medicines around it. So there you go. That's a bit of a history of the modern sort of antecedents of the plague and sanitation and all that kind of stuff. I hope you all enjoyed that. We will be back. Well, I'll be back next week. We're going to continue with Horrocks and the Black Death and go on a little bit further. We've got accounts from England and from Geneva, I think, as well. Thank you very much to... We only got one super chat from Mikey Bikey. Thank you very much, Mikey Bikey. And I will see you all, I guess, tomorrow night on Artie and Fist. Otherwise, next week. Good night, bros.